So my name is Nina Farnia. Welcome to the International People's Tribunal on U.S. Imperialism. I'm a special rapporteur for the tribunal and also the co-chair, along with Helyeh Doutaghi, who you'll meet later today. We welcome you here today as we embark on a long project to dismantle sanctions regimes toward winning the independence of the global majority from U.S. imperialism. Unfortunately, it has been a somber week for the global majority. Yesterday, a video of the brutal murder of Tyree Nichols by the Memphis Police Department was released to the public. And there were protests last night in New York City organized by some of the folks in this room. That video, if you saw it, reflects the worst of humanity. It's the worst of what we are able to do to our own. But we should not be confused by the fact that the killers were Black. That does not complicate the issue. We know that imperialism, colonialism, and white supremacy has always had an attendant Black or brown face. In our countries throughout the world that have been colonized and subject to imperialism, there has always been a Black or brown agent participating in the Western project. Those killers in that video were agents of white supremacy. Just a few days before, also this week, Israel massacred 9 people in Jenin, 9 Palestinians in Jenin, and seriously wounded dozens more. Israel also is a US partner. And so both of these were projects of the US. And as everybody here knows, early in the week, the US announced that it would be sending 31 tanks to Ukraine in what is in reality not a Ukrainian war, but a US war precipitated by NATO in order to effect regime change in Moscow, the largest Russia, the largest country in the world, one of the most powerful, and neighbor to China, which will inevitably become the most powerful nation in the world, if it's not yet. So this has been a bad week. Many weeks are bad, but this one has been particularly bad. The objective of sanctions regimes is the exploitation and theft of global South resources and wealth. They are not peaceful policy alternatives to war, as the US government would have us believe. They are a legal mechanism for the pillaging of Latin American, African, and Asian resources. Historically speaking, they continue the uneven and unjust distributions of power and wealth produced by Western colonialism. But the US, despite everything I just said, and because of it, the US is in decline. US imperialism is in decline. And as US imperialism declines, there are 2 paths forward for us: our victory or our demise. Global warming and environmental destruction, twin consequences of imperialism and colonialism, now arguably pose the greatest threat to human existence. It's no longer US militarism that poses the greatest threat. The 2 pose the greatest threat together now. And the capitalist class will not put our planet on the right path. Only we can do that. Our victory is now necessary to our survival as a species. So as a friend and comrade said many, many years ago, what is to be done? Today's program will offer you a glimpse of the world we will create. The law is a critical piece in this effort. I'm a legal historian, so I believe in the importance of the law. In order to contend with reality as it is, not idealism, but realism, we must contend with the law. We also must contend with the law if we hope to transform the world. Because while the law is a tool for the oppressor, it can also be a tool for us. Limited in its abilities, but a tool nonetheless. We have invited speakers, esteemed tribunal jurors and supporters, many of whom are in the room, who have actually used the law to both imagine a new world and to take the steps necessary to create it.
We know that sanctions, economic coercive measures, and embargoes, as led by the US regime against countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, are rooted in the very same systems of oppression that colonized these lands. We understand sanctions as imperialist tools that are designed to police and discipline those who dare to defy the imperialist global order, those who support and lead national liberation movements in our regions, and those who fight against the intervention by the US and other functionaries of imperialism who execute their economic and political agendas at the expense of our sovereignty, at the expense of our people, and at the expense of our homelands. One of our central tasks of this tribunal is to provide an alternative discourse and a critical framework to analyze how sanctions function and to unmask the intention of those who design and implement them. Our goal is to topple the prevailing imperialist narratives characterizing sanctions as supposedly peaceful alternatives to war and reject the idea that sanctions, in their targeted and smart forms, were born out of humanitarian concern. Sanctions are designed to de-develop the economies of targeted nations by isolating and undermining governments and the industries upon which they rely. No sector goes untouched here. Banking, shipping, insurance, ports, trades, commodities, healthcare, energy, and the list goes on. Often sanctions are just the supposedly legal pretext to simply loot wealth from the nations. This happens through both asset freezing and withholding payments to settle debts. Targeting the state's ability to provide for the basic welfare of its population, in turn, undermines the people's faith in their governments. Sanctions at their core are designed to create conditions for revolt. It doesn't take a political scientist. No, it shouldn't take a political scientist to figure out the ultimate goal of these measures. Regime change operations, counter-revolutions, orchestrate coups, and exploit and hijack internal contradictions within these targeted states, aiming to transform the target in a direction that secures condition for the reproduction of global capitalist order. In terms of the structure of the tribunal, over the next 6 months, and starting next week, the tribunal will hold hearings on the impact of sanctions on 16 countries in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. Everyone is welcome to register and attend any of the hearings that will take place online. You can register on our website at sanctionstribunal.org. We will conclude the tribunal in Venezuela in July. The nations represented in the tribunal are Cuba, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Haiti, Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, Libya, Palestine, Nicaragua, North Korea, Sudan, Syria, Venezuela, Yemen, and Zimbabwe. During the country hearings, experts, victims, and attorneys will present evidence and provide testimonies against the crimes committed by the US through the use of sanctions. The countries we have selected are not an exhaustive list of the targeted nations by the US sanctions, but they serve as representative examples of the purpose and function of imperialist sanctions, as well as the various levels and forms of impact. In terms of the themes of the tribunal, our effort utilized a systemic approach to investigate and expose the brutality of sanctions, and we will not permit the imperialist forces, including some of the so-called left in the global north, to conceal the siege under new terminology. We are not looking for a better, more humane, or more targeted sanctions. This tribunal is a contribution to the global movement that will put an end to these measures. All right, so it is within this context that in addition to investigating the measurable yet very devastating harms of sanctions, including public health, food security, access to humanitarian aid and equipment, access to international financial systems, banking network and services, education, growing poverty, falling productivity, shrinking consumption power, precarious labor and fluctuations in the labor market, and currency depreciation. We will also be investigating and exposing the slow and structural violence of sanctions. Those are the harms that are often unseen and that are often unrecognized as violence of sanctions because they take place gradually, because they take place across time and space.